Welcome, Gary Edwards, to the Business Chat podcast.
Thank you, Lisa. Very happy to be here.
We've been playing chasey for quite a few months now, trying to tee up this interview. So, yay, it's actually happening right now.
A new year, a new start, and looking forward to talking to you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, we met through Professional Speakers Australia probably about 4 years ago now, and you have achieved a lot within the organisation. Nevin Award winner, certified speaking professional, president of South Australia chapter. So, I really admire, just like to acknowledge your service to the speaking industry before we get started.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very kind. Yes, I just really enjoy it. It's a great community, and I like helping other people, and I'm very grateful to have that acknowledged.
Fabulous. So today we're going to be talking about negotiation and whether or not you're a leader, whatever your position is, or whatever you're doing in the world, we all need to be able to negotiate what we want in life. So you're going to share with us your 6 steps to effective negotiation during our chat today, which is a fascinating topic and one that I'm really looking forward to diving into and finding out more about from your perspective, Gary. But before we talk about the topic, let's talk a little bit about you. And can you share how is it that you came to be a consultant in communication and negotiation? Let's talk a little bit about your previous life.
Certainly, my previous life. Well, I've been doing this role, working for myself for about 20 years, which is a big shock, a bit of a surprise that it's been that long. But I was one of 6 children. My parents had 6 kids, but they had them in 2 groups of 3 with a 6-year gap in between. So I kind of grew up with in a group of 3. I was in the younger 3, so there was the older and younger group, and I was the middle child. So there was me and my 2 brothers, and my sister was at home as well, but it was mainly the 3 of us together. And we would have lots of arguments, and I found out that I was very good at arguing. And I'd have arguments with the brother above me, and they weren't harsh arguments. They were kind of intellectual, clever, trying to outwit each other type of arguments. And I remember at one stage he said to his girlfriend, we were in our teenage years, and he said, "Don't ever argue with Gary, you won't win." And I was very surprised. I thought, oh, wow, that's great. I like the idea. And so I've always been interested in how we communicate, how we, different points of view, how we negotiate, how we resolve conflict and so on. And during my teenage years, I became more interested in that. I read a couple of books in the area and just sort of realized that this is something that I was particularly interested in. When I left school, I had 2 goals. I wanted to be a lawyer or a teacher. My oldest brother was a teacher, and I became a lawyer. And I liked the intellectual challenge. I liked the analysis and the arguing side of it, the argument, how to construct an argument and so on. And so I did that for about 10 years. I found it very useful, very interesting, but I also found it very frustrating because I found myself wishing that my clients had my legal skills before they got to me, the ability to communicate, to negotiate, to resolve conflict. I remember thinking one day, legal skills are wasted on lawyers because, if you had them earlier in your life, you wouldn't need lawyers so much. And
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. And as lawyers, you must meet people when they're not at their best when they need a lawyer usually. So people are already going through a lot of stress and angst and tension.
yeah, I found the main problem wasn't that they didn't know the law. I mean, they didn't know what the law was, but that wasn't their issue. Their issue was that they couldn't communicate and negotiate with people. After about 10 years of that, I stopped working full-time as a lawyer, and I worked for the University of South Australia for 7 years. To become a lawyer in those days, you did your undergraduate degree, and then you did a postgraduate program on all the very practical skills that lawyers need, how to draft court documents, etc., how to do a will, and also how to prepare and present in court, and how to negotiate and resolve conflict. So I was there for 7 years. I was the head of the course for the last 2 years, and my speciality was all that communication side of things. And during that time, I also did research and consulting projects, in particular with the South Australia Police on conflict resolution, and a project with hostage negotiators, which was fascinating to find out more about how they do their job. So, as I say, for the last 20 years, I have my own business, Speak with Influence, and it's about how we communicate in leadership, sales, negotiation, how you pitch ideas, to win funding, and of course the classic difficult conversations that we all have to have.
Yes, absolutely. I've had quite a few conversations on the podcast around communication, and I did chat with Andrea Newton from the UK around having what she calls conversations that matter, which I think is a great term. All those conversations that we know we need to have, but we tend to put off.
Yep. No, she's a great presenter. I really enjoyed that. I've now tapped into her podcast as well. And it's interesting that Conversations That Matter, that's actually the title of one of my programs. I didn't come up with that title, the client did, but it's obviously a title. It's a description that is very relevant to people.
Yes, yeah, because a conversation may not necessarily be challenging. It could be more awkward or uncomfortable or like weird, even. It doesn't necessarily have to be about those things that we typically think of, like underperformance or somebody's not behaving appropriately. It can be all sorts of things. So I think that that is a good naming. Now, Gary, you've also got a bit of a hidden superpower that also makes you unique and is very much part of your essence. Can you share that with us?
Yes, Lisa, apart from having a normal job, I've also been a professional magician in my life. I started doing magic as a kid. Lots of kids do that at about the age of 7. But I was a kind of nerdy little kid, and now I'm a nerdy big kid. But when you do magic tricks as a child and you fool adults, you get a real insight, and you suddenly go, "Really, is that what you believed? And is that how you saw things? And why did you believe that?" And so, as a very early in my life, I started to realize that you could make people believe things that weren't necessarily true, and you could get them to trust you when they didn't necessarily, they shouldn't trust you. And it's always a bit of a joke amongst my friends that if you're a lawyer and a magician, and I speak about trust, it's a strange combination. So when I grew up, I kept doing it. I did it part-time as a part-time job, going out to corporate functions, doing magic at tables, at dinners and that kind of thing. And it's kind of been a bit of a social experiment for many years. And I've learnt a lot about the psychology of communication and how we perceive things, and how you get people to believe what you need them to believe. So it's been not only entertaining and enjoyable, it's been a really valuable tool and a valuable insight for me.
Brilliant, a real superpower indeed, and a great combination. It's wonderful, isn't it, when we can tap into those skills that perhaps were once a hobby that then become a bit of a side hustle and then maybe a part-time gig, and then incorporate all those skills and different things that we're able to do into who we are. It's wonderful to have that.
And one of the things about it that I liked, and I struggled with it in the beginning because I'm a natural introvert and you've got to go out and entertain people, is that you get close up to people like never before. I mean, you are literally intruding into the group. You're booked at a function and you have to literally butt into the group, and you are physically close to them and you are talking with them, and they're going, "Who the hell are you?" And so you are as up close and kind of in their face as you can possibly be. And that's a fascinating place to be. Most people don't like public speaking. They don't like being 10 feet away from people, talking to a group of people. But when you're up close and right in with them, that's where it really happens. And that is the same for leaders, of course. You've just got to be in there with people and up close. You can't afford to stand back and be away from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love close-up magic. Do you think that I also identify as being an introvert, and yet I love performing and entertaining. So we share that in common. But do you think that, Gary, when you've got your box of magic tricks, that you're almost like stepping into that arena with that persona? So that would make it a little bit easier for you.
Absolutely. And I spoke to a friend of mine who's a psychologist many years ago, and she just said to me, introverts like to have a role to play.
Mm.
And I thought that explains a lot. And if I go to a party, I'm not big on parties and standing. I'd rather be the person who carries around the food and gives it to people. And she said, well, that's because introverts want to have something to do. They want to have a role to
Yeah.
play. They don't, you kind of don't like just the general chit chat. And that's what being a magician is. You're playing a
Mm.
role, and you can act out that role, and you go home, and you're not completely different, but you're not that person all the time.
Mm. Brilliant. Brilliant. Fascinating conversation. We could spend the whole podcast talking about magic and superpowers and having your own uniqueness, but we're here to talk about negotiation. So let's talk a bit more about negotiation as sort of a broad skill set. I certainly didn't learn it when I did my MBA many years ago. Do you think that it is a skill set that's typically taught these days in management schools?
Yes, more and more. I'm sure there are some that don't. As you know, soft skills are often seen as, not the hard skills that you need. You learn strategy, you learn finance, you learn innovation, but the people skills are often they're often ignored, or they're often thought to be a lower level. That if you're doing an MBA, you should have learnt negotiation before now. And I've seen materials from some graduate and MBA programs, and they're very good materials. But I've spoken to the people who went through the program, and they can't remember anything about the materials. And there's no evidence that they actually can negotiate. And they talk. So for me, the way I define it is that you can learn what to do, but you don't really learn how to do it. And I'm very much focused on how to do it. I'm kind of the how-to guy when it comes to communication negotiation. It's absolutely how you
Excellent.
do it, not just what you do it. And
Yeah.
you've got to end up with to be a good negotiator. It's not something that you can go. Hang on a minute, let me just think about that for a while.
Mm.
You've got to have a good negotiation instinct. You've got to be able to do
Yeah.
it quickly and readily. It has to become part of you in order to do it really well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what types of negotiations do everyday leaders face in their work? What would be the common ones?
Well, if you pick up any textbook on negotiation, on the first or second page, there will be the sentence in every book, which is, we all negotiate all day, every day. And it's true. Everything we do is a type of negotiation. And for leaders, that is certainly the case. And there's a spectrum from formal to informal. And so the formal types of negotiation would be things like contracts, uh, sales, and partnerships, things that look and feel like a negotiation, where there's a time and place, there's a meeting, and you work out your plan of action and so on, all the way down to the more informal things like just how we have meetings, how we organize work. And then some of those things become more formal once you get into performance management. Things start to get a bit
Mm.
more, they get a bit more serious, they get a bit more formal. So it's that spectrum of behaviors and workplace needs that become part of the negotiation role of a leader. And today, of course, leaders are, really under the pump, and business owners trying to negotiate probably two things in the current environment. Where do I go now? What do we do now? What's my business going to look like? And how do we do that? And the second thing is, of course, subject to whatever restrictions we're under, how do I get people back to the office? That's become just a huge issue. People like working from home. I've just been reading some research on whether it really does create greater productivity. There's evidence that it doesn't after a while. And productivity is not the only thing that an organization needs from its employees. So that whole negotiation between workers and
Mm.
employers, where you work, what you do, how you do it, has become much more complicated lately.
Yeah. One of the things that fascinates me, Gary, that I'm thinking about as you're speaking is the issue of authentic negotiation, because I can remember being a leader and a lot of the negotiations I had to do came from somebody with a higher paycheck than me, and it was very difficult when I didn't personally believe in what I was negotiating. Maybe it didn't sit right with me. Perhaps it wasn't aligned with my values. How do you deal with that sort of day-to-day internal struggle with getting the negotiation done in an authentic way?
That is a really interesting question that I've been asked a lot. A lot of people have said to me, how do you support something and go out and sell something or negotiate something when you don't really believe in it, or it wasn't your idea, and all of a sudden you've got to tell the troops? And um,
Yeah.
and to think about it in a little bit black and white terms, it might be something. If it becomes something that you totally cannot support, then that's going to lead you down a pathway. You're going to have to say, I can't do it, I won't do it, or maybe you'll say to the people that you're talking to, hey, I don't agree with this, but this is the way it is. So the first question is, can I actually support this even though I don't want to? And if I can't, then I won't, basically. So there becomes that ethical limit where we just can't do it. If we decide that we can do it, even though we may not want to, then it becomes a question of how do we do that? Sometimes we need to be seen to be supporting an agenda that we all agree on. Like you go to a meeting, you all agree, and the thing you don't agree on, you don't necessarily support it, but you agree to support it.
Yeah.
You agree to come out of that meeting and say, this is the way we're going. And one of the key things in meetings, of course, is you really want the person ideally to support your idea, but at least not to undermine it. You don't want them to go away and say, well, we had this meeting, but it's a load of rubbish. There needs to be a commonality there. Now, if there is a problem if you feel that you haven't been heard, then that's another issue that needs to be discussed as well. So you're quite right. It can be very hard to be authentic, but I think people have to decide, can I do this or can't I? And if I can, how do I do that as best for me and also for the people that I'm talking to? Because the other person, the people you try to sell the idea to, they can kind of tell if you don't believe it. And so you need to either believe it or you need to be able to address that concern that they've got.
Yeah, excellent explanation. I'm so glad that I asked that question, because I was thinking about that a lot when I was thinking about the topic. So what happens, Gary, when negotiations don't go as planned? What's the end result?
Yeah. Negotiations tend to go wrong for two reasons. It's a little bit of a Goldilocks scenario here. Goldilocks laid on the bed, and one was too soft and one was too hard and one was just right. So negotiations go wrong if we're too soft, if we prioritize the other person and what they need, and essentially we give in and we don't get our needs met. And in a business place, that means that we are not optimizing the outcome. We're not getting the best outcome that we could get. If it's too hard, if the bed is too hard and you've steamrolled the other person, then you've got the outcome that you wanted, but you've damaged the relationship. So those two halves of the negotiation, results and relationship, we need to balance those. When it goes wrong, what it means, of course, is that we don't get the outcomes that we want. We possibly damage the relationship. And we end up with, if you're dealing with staff, for example, you end up with staff who either are doing the wrong thing because you gave in and let them do what they're doing even though you didn't want to, or they're doing something that they don't want to do because you didn't take the time to talk to them about it. And so staff can easily become disengaged and uncommitted to what you're trying to do. So overall, you don't get a good culture, you don't get good results, and to some extent, and I've seen this a lot, business people, you get a bit like you want it to happen as quickly and easy as possible. And so you kind of push through a bit, or you give in because that gets it out of the way. But you're basically deluding yourself. I mean, talk about magic. You are under the illusion, the illusion that things are going well when in fact they're not.
Yeah. And also it's the same as ineffective communication. It costs time and money to the organization as well. If the negotiation didn't work out, it's got to be repeated. Other solutions have got to be found. So it is an absolutely critical skill that leaders have to get comfortable with, or learn how to do it better by getting some help from an expert like yourself.
I think that's true. Thank you. And the real issue at the moment is that it's always been hard, and now it's a whole lot harder because the issues are bigger. We're under time pressure. Everyone's under pressure of, well, I just need to survive. We need to earn some money.
Yeah.
We're under pressure of how we do it. It's easier to probably negotiate if you're face-to-face in the office with someone than it is via a Zoom message. So the context that we are trying to negotiate in, and the stakes and the issues that we're negotiating about, have become a whole lot more complex. And in all of that, we're all feeling a bit scared. We're all a bit uncertain. Our emotions are heightened. And therefore, our ability to stay calm and talk our way through these key issues has become more difficult because we're dealing with ourselves and other people who are, quite frankly, more emotional and therefore more likely to either give in or fight back. It becomes that fight and flight response, unfortunately.
Yeah, interesting. And the word that came to mind as you were describing that current scenario, Gary, is empathy. So that, having that lens of kindness and empathy and compassion during your negotiation, which perhaps typically wouldn't be a word that you associate with negotiation, because I tend to think, discipline and structure and firm. But I think that today, if there isn't that trust and empathy and compassion that's brought to the table as part of that negotiation, then it must be hard to get any further.
Yeah, and in the context of what is being called the Great Resignation, this idea that maybe people are leaving their job because I don't like how I'm being treated, or I'd rather work from home and I'd rather do my life differently. If a leader or a business owner doesn't recognise that, then no amount of hardcore negotiation is going to work. Because what that really means, if there is this opportunity for people to resign and do something else, it actually means that those people have more power at the moment in the negotiation. They don't have to put up with whatever they might have put up with in the past. I like it from home. I don't have to travel 2 hours a day. I'm staying here. You can't make me come back to work. And so there's a greater amount of power in the employees at the moment in the ability to do that. And so without that ability to be empathetic, and it's not about being warm and fuzzy. I mean, it never has been, but it's not about being warm and fuzzy. It's about doing what works. I've worked with those hostage negotiators, and the bottom line with hostage negotiation, to be blunt, is that if push comes to shove, they will shoot the guy who's taken the hostage. So they can get that outcome if they want to most of the time. What they do, of course, is that they show a lot of what they call tactical empathy. How do I build the relationship? How do I do what I have to do to engage this person? They don't like the person. They don't like what they stand for, perhaps, but they just have to do it. So it's not about being warm and fuzzy, although a lot of that wouldn't go astray these days. It would actually be nicer if we were all a little kinder to each other. But it's really doing what you have to do, because otherwise it's just not going to work.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome insights, Gary. Thank you so much for sharing today. Now, you've got a 6-step framework for negotiation. Can you tell us about that?
I can, yes. So I mentioned before, the two halves of negotiation are relationship and result, and you've got to get that balance right. So I've got a little diagram which we can't show on a podcast, but I just want to describe it. If you imagine a circle divided up into 6 parts, like a little pie diagram, 3 of them are about results and 3 of them are about relationships. So these are essentially the 6 core skills that you need to get good at if you want to be a good negotiator. So on the relationship side, the headings are past, present, and future. So when it comes to past, that just means, how's your relationship been with this person up till now? Have you taken the time to build a strong relationship with them and to have a good relationship, for example, with your staff? One of the things that we're seeing now is that people are saying, I'm not going to go back into work because I have to work for that manager and he or she hasn't treated me well. So what has been your relationship in the past? And if you haven't done it by now, you better get your skates on and do it. Present relationship, when it comes time to having that interaction, that negotiation with the customer or with the employee, what you've got to do is make the relationship right here, right now, regardless of what the past relationship has been. You've got to make it safe and possible for that person to want to talk to you. And the 2 key things here, this is actually from a book called Crucial Conversations, just to give it a reference, is respect and a common goal. So respect is, I'm willing to listen. I want to listen. I want to hear what you've got to say. I show you a lot of respect. and also a common goal. We're in this together, and we are going to come up with something that works for both of us. And that's a critical phrase. It has to work for both of us. And when you can get those two things working together, respect and a common goal, the other person goes, okay, this immediate relationship that we have here and now, I can have the conversation with you. And then the future relationship part of it is, okay, let's assume we've come up with some outcome. What happens now? How do we operationalize this? What are the next steps that we take? And how do we follow up and review it later? How do we make sure that it's working longer term? So past, present, and future. On the results side, the three key skills are the ability to be persuasive, the ability to problem solve, and the ability to bargain. So taking them one at a time, the ability to be persuasive means I can try and tell you why my idea is a good one. I can also try and tell you why maybe there's no choice. We have to do it this way. So what's your argument, essentially? What's the argument that you have? Mm-hmm. And that's certainly something that I learned as a lawyer in court. Put your best foot forward. How do you persuade the decision maker that this is a good way to go? So persuasion is part of it. And that's a very competitive style. If you're only trying to persuade each other, things are going to break down. So you have to add to that problem solving, which is where you're trying to work out, what are my concerns? If I'm an employer and you're an employee, what are my concerns about you working from home? What are your concerns about coming back into the office? One of the key things that's cropped up now, I think I mentioned it before, is that employees are saying, I'm more productive at home, and employers are saying, well, that's fine, but productivity is not the only thing we need. We also need to be able to get together and do innovation, and that happens better if we're face-to-face. So we both need to work out what our concerns and interests are. What are the issues that we need to sort out? And the third thing is about bargaining. How do we make this work? And that's about wants and needs. What do I want to do? Well, I want to stay home and I want to work from home. What do I need to do? Well, I need to support my family. So maybe we can come up with an arrangement, for example, where I stay home 3 days a week and come into the office 2 days a week. So what's the trade-off? How do we get to the point where I get most of what I need and you get most of what you need? It's not everything we want to get, but it's more about what we need to get. So on the results side, persuasion, problem solving, and bargaining.
Excellent. What a great framework, and relatively easy to remember with that pie diagram. And in the show notes, we'll put the links to Gary's website where you can find out more. I'm sure read articles and all sorts of other information around your work. One question I have about negotiating, is it typical to, in the workplace, would it be typical to have a third person present, like a neutral person, or is it usually one-on-one?
Not typical, no. Sometimes when there's performance reviews, that kind of thing, sometimes the employee wants to have another person there, a support person. That's always a good thing also, because that person is not as emotionally involved and is more likely to hear. It's a bit like going to the doctor. You take someone to the doctor if you're going to get bad news, because that person can hear what is going in one ear and out the other for you. And of course, sometimes you want another person there because you want someone who is essentially a witness to what was said. You want to make sure that it's not misinterpreted. So it's not typical, but I think it's a good idea to have a couple of people on each side, if you use that term, to listen and to hear things that the other people may not be hearing.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent. It's been a fascinating conversation, Gary. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. We'll have to do a follow-up, and then maybe in the follow-up we can talk about, body language, vocal techniques, the words that we use, because there's so much more to it. We've really just done a little bit of a skim on the topic. So would you like to come back another time and
I would love
dive
to do
a little
that.
bit deeper? Yeah, we
Sounds
can
good.
do part 1, part 2. All right. So I like to finish off each episode with the same 2 questions for everybody. So the first question is, can you share a quote or a mantra that you live by?
Yes, one that I live by is a part of a poem by Lord Tennyson, where he said, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep." And that for me is my philosophy of service. we could all lay down, and it would be nice to give up and just stop and lay down, but
Yeah.
there are miles to go before we sleep. We've all got promises to keep, so we're all
Mm.
doing our best, and we just need to kind of keep going as best we can. But can I give you one other, which is when I first started working at university, most of the people who worked with us weren't. I'd done some teaching, but most people hadn't. And so we did some professional development in teaching skills. And I remember the guy who trained us, who was very good. He had this phrase, which I've always remembered, about how you get people to change their behaviors. And this goes back to what I said before about sometimes in the MBA, it tells you what to do, but not how to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, we don't think ourselves into new ways of acting. We act ourselves into new ways of thinking. So it's not just about being intellectual and then hoping that things happen. You actually have to get people doing stuff, and then that changes their mind. So we don't think ourselves into new ways of acting. We act ourselves into new ways of thinking.
Yeah. Brilliant. Love that. And Gary, a book that has had an impact on you, maybe a book that's evergreen that you refer to often, and one that you think would be a good addition to anyone's bookshelf.
An evergreen book in the negotiation area is Getting to Yes. It's an absolute core book. It started, in a sense, the idea of let's stop arguing and let's start problem solving. If people, I'm always surprised that people haven't read it. It's many years old, but if you haven't read it, it's an absolutely great place to start. And I'd also like to recommend another one, which has got nothing to do with negotiation, but it's the most recent one I've read, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's a real game changer in communication. It's called The First Minute. And it's a very simple little book. It's about how in the first minute, when you go up to someone and say, hey, can you help me with this? It's a little formula for how not to waffle on, but to actually get to the point, give the key information, ask for what you need, and see whether the other person can help you. And I like it because I like little processes like that make it easy for people to communicate, but also the philosophy behind it, which is about clear, like I know that you agree with as well, clear and effective communication.
Every time I chat with a guest on the podcast, Gary, I order one or two new books because everyone's got such amazing suggestions. If I haven't already got them, I order them. And if I've got them, I have another look at the book. So thank you for sharing your two recommendations. Gary, how can people find out more about you?
So there's my website, which is garyedwards.com.au. I'm on LinkedIn, just my name, Gary Edwards, and if you put the word influence in there, that will come up. And I'm also experimenting a little bit on TikTok, making TikTok videos, which is not a standard business platform usually, but I'm working on that, and I think it's a good platform to get the message out there because it's about business, but it's also about life generally. Negotiating is a life skill. So you can find me on TikTok as well.
Okay, so what's your TikTok handle? Is that the definition for being on TikTok?
Speak with influence. That's right.
Excellent. Well, I'll have to check you out. I looked at the word of TikTok when it first came out. I thought, no, a little bit too hard. But I like watching other people's TikToks.
I've spent a week over Christmas being addicted to all the little videos, but at the same time, kind of going, oh, that's interesting. I could use that. And we could do that. So,
yeah. Oh, great to explore new things. Thank you so much for sharing your 6-step negotiation formula, Gary. Really, really useful and inspiring. And it's been wonderful chatting with you today.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I've really enjoyed it.